about us, because I think there are very few of us in the room, and there are discussions to be had about why that is, partly. So we have to work out which one to press. Okay, so who is us? So there are a lot of people in the world that we need to engage with the issues about the climate, and this is a very important conference, and I think Robin's done a wonderful job of, at very short notice, of bringing a lot of different people together this week, and I'd like to congratulate him on that. But we are very often in the room talking to a group of people that we by and large know already. So I think in terms of being activists, we want to talk about what are the different kinds of activists, and there are obviously books written about this, but for me there are as a sort of protesting activists. So there are people like Greenpeace who are out there, they're taking action to protest against things or to try and stop things, or to try and encourage us to do things, but it's a very direct action, and maybe that's what people think of as activists. I take a broader view and see that most of us are activists in various ways. I'd like us all to be activists, and I think the other sort of main type of the other two main types of activism, one is taking positive direct action on the ground. So that's, for me, that's mainly what my organisation does. We're a small charity, and we work directly with healthcare to try and influence clinicians in particular to make changes to healthcare and healthcare systems. So 1010 is another organisation which some of you may have heard of. They have clear goals of reducing carbon footprints, and they are engaging people with simple actions towards those goals. And there are units like David's Sustainable Development Unit, which are perhaps more, they're doing some direct things on the ground, but they're also working to change the framework in which we all operate, and to change policy and to change levers that affect the way that we all do things. And Robin's not here anymore, but the Climate and Health Council is another very important kind of organisation, and they are an advocacy organisation. So I suppose a bit more like Greenpeace, but in a less direct action way. They are advocating for change. So Robin's organisation will use the power of the professions, the health profession, to try and engage people in the importance of climate change. Because as David mentioned, doctors are very powerful, and by and large people still respect them. So what makes an activist? I'd be interested in whether we consider ourselves to be activists. I think coming on a bank holiday Monday to a meeting is probably a definition of an activist to me. But I think we also need to look at whether, even if we are activists in some way, we all have these feelings of somebody else is doing this. Maybe it's not my priority. Maybe I'd like to engage more in it, but actually I don't know all the answers, and I'm slightly afraid of being shown up as not knowing all the answers, so I'm not going to put myself forward. So for me, maybe being an activist is actually getting over some of those worries, and saying, okay, it doesn't matter, I don't know all the answers, that's not the end of the world. The end of the world is a lot of things, but it's not being shown up, and it's not being having this as a priority as well as other things. So there are lots of issues that stop us maybe from taking action, and I think in order to overcome some of those issues, we need to maybe talk through them, and as David's shown, maybe use some science sometimes to show research that helps us over those barriers. So I guess everyone in the world is a potential activist, and we would like to engage everyone in the world on this issue. We know we're not going to probably, but we need a groundswell of people. And part of coming to these things is to try to find out what those ways are. And it's partly because the time is running out, for me anyway. We haven't got all the time in the world to have perfect science and to understand the perfect reasons for doing things, and we need to move, but we also need to persuade other people to move with us. And that persuading other people to move with us is sometimes a process which takes a long time. And I think most of you were here this morning when you heard David True from the church speaking, the church's point of view. And it's very interesting to me that he switched from talking about sort of spiritual issues about stewardship of the planet to talking about buildings. And although it's relatively easy to measure carbon within buildings and the energy use of buildings, it's actually not often the main thing. And it's not often the thing which identifies the core business of that group of people. So within the church, although churches are incredibly important as buildings, and for some people they're very symbolic, obviously, of the church, they're not actually probably what creates the main carbon footprint. So within healthcare, it's staff and patients and healthcare itself that takes up the carbon footprint, or that creates carbon footprint. So I kind of assumed that David was going to do all the normal graphs and things which show that we have to get from where we are now to 90% less by 2050, which is a huge drop of carbon. And David's unit's done some really important work, as he said, in measuring the carbon footprint of the NHS, and which is a hugely valuable thing for all of us working in that area, because it means we can start to unpick what are the reasons behind that. So, interestingly, it's not the buildings, it's not the travel even, but it's the stuff that goes on within those buildings. It's the actual healthcare and the procurement. And I haven't got the slide, but it's within that 60%, a whole third of that is just on drugs. So the carbon footprint of drugs within the NHS is as much as, if not more than the buildings. And that has led us as an organisation to work with clinical groups, so specialist people within healthcare, rather than trying to tackle the buildings. Because actually, even if you close down all buildings, you're still going to have to give healthcare to people. And so you can insulate all you like, you can have perfect travel plans, but you still need the healthcare itself, and that's what we need to change. One of my questions this morning was about positive messaging, and again I think, David mentioned it as well, that we've tried over the last 4 years different kinds of messages, and my first instinct is to give oh my God, this is really urgent, we're stuffed, we're going to have to, we've got to do all we can really quickly, and it comes across as scary and negative, and people do put their heads in the sand, or they just ignore you. And they don't want to hear those messages. So I've kind of taught myself to stop panicking over the years and to try and give these more positive things. And in fact they are. They're very real, and they are more engaging. They feel sometimes as though I'm slightly giving a double picture, because in my head there is the help, panic, we've got to do this really quickly, and you're presenting this very positive, very calm, take your own pace. But actually, I think it is better, and I think that, as David said, with business working like this, you're going to get some people who are just doing it for the bandwagon effect. They're just ticking a box. But actually, what we've also found is that engaging people with those very simple things is the first step quite often. So some people will get the big picture and the moral picture and the arguments for inequalities, but a lot of people will just get stuck in at a very simple level, and that leads on to other things. So the M&S example is that they told their staff to take back coat hangers, and they saved millions of pounds. But as soon as they stopped the campaign, the staff went on handing out coat hangers. When they engaged staff in a whole sustainability exercise and got them to understand why that was important, it wasn't just to save money, it was because of the environment. The staff became engaged, but then they continued to be engaged after that programme stopped. So it's a very strong motivator in terms of engaging staff. And those staff are what we would now call, I guess, activists. So this is an example from a renal unit. So we've done some work with nephrology, and people feel engaged with sustainability. They don't go to work to save money, they go to work to save lives, largely. But they find the environment and sustainability a bigger motivator quite often than money. So the staff on the front line will engage with these issues. Sustainability is a way of saving money, as David said, and there are huge numbers in the NHS because it's such a big organisation. So although we have a big opportunity to engage people, 44,000 GPs, is it, I think, something like that, huge numbers of people. So like the church, you've got a big audience sort of ready-made in a way, but we also have these huge numbers of the problems that we're trying to deal with, which can be quite scary at times. So just on saving waste medicines, we can save an estimated £90 million. And I should have the carbon equivalent. Do you know what it is, David? Big. Thanks. So again, the positive messages of personal interest in these issues, but also integrity. So I think a lot of people feel a sort of general sense of unease. There's an increasing depression. Depression's going around the world. It's not just a rich country illness anymore. And in some senses, obesity or overeating is perhaps a manifestation of that in some ways. It's partly they're not moving enough, but actually that's also tied in with mental health issues. And I think part of that is to do with a sort of dislocation of ourselves from our natural environment. So the whole idea that we can move into a place where we are reintegrated into our environment and feel connected with it, and that being a very positive mental step forward is important in a lot of different places within the NHS. So occupational therapists, for example, and mental health. So engaged people stay with the organisation for longer, they put in more effort, and they're more productive. And this has been shown in industry, and it's certainly shown in healthcare. It's because people are more satisfied. I mean, people who are engaged generally are more satisfied. We at the Centre for Sustainable Healthcare, we try and engage people through these three kind of elements: inspiring people, empowering them, and transformation. And by inspiring, we mean quite often partly vision about what the future could be, but also very simple things, as I've said before. It's getting people through the door, it's getting people started on something. So nearly always that's a very practical, physical thing. It might be sitting around the table talking about, okay, who travels to work, shall we share travel, or boiling the kettle with too much water in it, very simple things. The NHS Forest was a programme we started just to get people inside healthcare buildings to look outside and to think about the environment in a physical way and connect with it again. So there are about 1.3 million employees in the NHS, and we want to plant 1.3 million trees. And it's very simple, and you can measure it. And that's not the aim, that's not the end goal, but it's a way of connecting people again with something very immediate. Then we talk about empowerment with tools, with knowledge. So as David said, measuring things, understanding. Once people are sort of on the journey, started on the journey, then you can talk to them about science, about measuring things, about how to change, and start to share those positive stories and messages, and then help each other hopefully with some of the issues that come up. So we've developed a tool which is called Sustainable Action Planning, and that's a very simple way of sitting people down in a team and getting them to think through what the steps are to their team becoming more effective, but also more sustainable. So saving money, improving experience, and saving carbon. And the nice thing about this, again, which is a positive thing in a very difficult environment, difficult journey really, is that once you have engaged people, they to a great extent internalise that learning and start to think of things for themselves. So things that you didn't even have on the list in the first place start happening. And then the third element we talk about is transformation, and that's really where we've got to get to, which is 90% less of carbon, of resources, whatever, by 2050. And initially that's a completely impossible task, but actually we've got to think of ways of doing that. So it's not just saying this is the issue, it's how are we going to get there. It's no good having a beautiful thing on the shelf which talks about what's going to happen if we don't get there. We need to start on the journey, and we need to have a plan for how we are going to get there. So for us this means working with natural communities. So in every organisation they will be different, but in healthcare they're mostly the clinical groups. Sometimes they are organisation based, but quite often they are people, so there are eye specialists, for example, in different units around the country. We give them some time, or one or two people from those groups, some time out to think about what sustainability means for that group. We empower them with some knowledge and training tools, and then we will send them back into that group with a network created, which means that they can go forward together as a group, which is enabled to change from within, really. So as well as all the sort of top-down policy changes and so on, this kind of engagement of people, for me, is incredibly important, because I think that you don't, politicians say they won't change unless they get the groundswell. They've shown that there is a lot of push already for change, but unless we engage individuals in the need for change, then some of those policies, some of those frameworks will not be enough to actually get things going quickly enough. I mean, I'm already worried that we're not going to get there quickly enough, but we have to take a deep breath and not panic, I think. And I think in terms of a journey which we are on, we hope it's not too long a journey, but we know that along that journey things are going to have to develop and change. So we think of it as a triathlon or as a decathlon or something. So you're going to have different stages. You know the end point, but like with the climate change targets, you give yourself midpoints by which time you will have decreased by 15%, for example. And the tools that you need to do that might be very different. So I think even in a small group like this, we sort of think, oh, these things need doing. These things must be done. It's usually, you're usually talking to a group of people, I'm usually talking to a group of people within the NHS, and they've come to learn, they think you're the expert, and I don't know what I'm doing. I have no idea how we're going to get to the end of this journey, but it's no good saying these things need doing. We have to do them ourselves. There isn't anybody else, this is it, basically. So I think Robin saying this morning about, okay, what are the alternatives? We need a plan, we need several plans, but we need to know what we're going to do, and we need to get started, because for me, there is no point having a perfect health service with wonderful hospitals if we don't have the carbon to run that. So we have to have that discussion up front, and I'd rather have it now than in 20 years' time when we're right at the edge of the cliff. So I think I have listened to something else, but basically we've got to hope that we can do this together. Engaging people isn't simple, so activists, who are activists? We're all activists, we have to be, I think. But the story I sort of sometimes tell at the end here is that, a sustainability scholar that we've got for this year, so she's learning with us and we're helping her to think through some of her issues. She took us a beautiful sustainability plan to her GP practice. She's young and she's a woman, and she finally got this sustainability plan on the agenda, quite far down. But so they got to her point, and she gave her explanation, and she just got withering looks from everybody. And she phoned us up the next day, and she was really depressed. And she said, I don't know, I've made this effort, I don't think it's going to work, I don't know what we're going to do, I'm really depressed. And then after about 3 days, she phoned back and she said, "It's amazing. All the senior people are coming now and saying, can we have solar panels? I'll help you with the waste audit. Can we do this?" And initially, their reaction had been very defensive, and they weren't able to cope with it, basically. But they had come back to her on their own terms and engaged with her. And she hadn't luckily walked away by then, so she was still there and able to engage back with them. So part of this is about people coming on their own terms, about engaging with something which is very difficult and scary. I guess that's the same for all of us. We need to find a way of not only telling our own stories, but engaging other people which fits with us and our personal abilities, but also is brave and doesn't put the burden onto somebody else, because I think there are no people who are going to sort this out. That's why I admire Robbie very much, that he's taken this amazingly massive issue and says, look, nobody's going to do this, we have to get people together. I met him first time about a month and a half ago. He said, we're having a big conference in May. I said, you're mad, you can't just organise a conference like that. You'll never get the people together. But he's doing it, and it's the only way forward, really, because there is no time to wait until the right conference hall. Well, there's a lovely conference hall, but the right number of people turn up in a year and a half's time. We've had time to advertise it beautifully. So here we are. It's going. We're doing it, and we have to get more people involved. Don't know how we do that, really, but I think the issue of us being activists is very important to remember. I'm very willing to help other people who want to get engaged. So you all feel engaged yourselves already, but also feel very free and open to talk about your worries, I think, talk about how you think we can do this, because there aren't any easy answers. So that's it.
I was just really startled by the pie chart that showed 60% of it being procurement. And I wondered if just some more information about anything that is being done in terms of working with the drug industries, or how that happens in order to bring the effort.
So, as well as working with, so David's doing a lot of work with pharmaceutical companies. There are lots of ways that you can do that. Drug companies are doing quite a lot themselves already, actually. So it's not necessarily part of it is the footprint of the drugs themselves, but it's also how much we use them. So it's back to this. It's not just changing the car. It's using it less. So, for example, in mental health, a lot of prescriptions that could actually be dealt with, or people could be given walking therapies or talking therapies or singing therapies, I think is the latest thing. So there are lots of alternatives. So some of it is about lower carbon alternatives. Some of it is about preventing these things before they get too bad. So in terms of obesity, that's a massive issue, and we've got to deal with it when it happens, but what we'd really like to do is to prevent those things happening further up the curve. So a lot of the research that's going on is obviously about how we prevent those things rather than deal with them later on. So clinicians are very good at dealing with the problem. They're not necessarily very good at stopping it happening.
I think drug companies are quite vulnerable on their carbon footprint, and it's not something they want to address. There's an institution in America called the Heartland Institute that you may have come across. They're not a medical charity. They are designed to sow confusion about climate change. And their latest adverts, which have appeared all over America, show the Unabomber saying, "This man believes in climate change." And the accompanying sort of press release says, "We're not saying that everyone who believes in climate change is mad, but And they are, the Heartland Institute are supported by GlaxoSmithKline.
And I'm glad. I mean, we have a program this year to do sustainable respiratory medicine funded by GlaxoSmithKline. And why are we taking money from the drug industry? Because we can't get money from anywhere else. So I mean, one of the things that we haven't really talked about is resources, because none of us, a lot of us don't have enough resources to do the job. So one thing deciding what we need to do, it's quite another thing actually getting that done. So we know loads of research we'd like to get done. We can't pay for it. We can hardly pay for our core programs. So resourcing these things is a massive issue. How do you get the money to do that? And so we've ended up taking money from GlaxoSmithKline to do something we want to do.
Well, I don't mind where the money comes from, as long as they don't tell me what to say.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wonder if you could recommend us to GlaxoSmithKline.
I'd be delighted.
Rachel, can I ask you, is your organisation countrywide?
Yes, we work nationally. I mean, we can work internationally. We get approached by people internationally because there aren't that many people doing this internationally, sadly. There's some in America and some in a couple in Europe, but they're very small again. The one in Europe that we work mostly with, Healthcare at Heart, has just been reduced to one person, their staff. And the one in America has been going for 20 years, but they've done different things. They've done mostly single cause issues, which seem to be easier to fund. So, I mean, there are lots of discussions to be had around, whether you get the positive message or the scary one, whether you do single cause things, as David said, whether you pick an image or a kind of embodiment of carbon that's more approachable. Yeah, well, we hope. But I think it's partly how you get that overall picture of how fast we've got to go and where. We know that we're all doing important things, but quite a lot of us putting a brave face on the fact that we're completely under-resourced, and we don't feel we've got the power to get where we need to be. And that is then down to individuals making an extra effort, but it feels like a big burden. So activists, whoever they are, become part of that sort of burdened group in a way.
I have a slightly different perspective. I left sort of busy environmental campaigning 20 years ago, and in the meantime, all these very, very well-intentioned, worthy people have been trying to bring climate change to people's attention. And to a certain extent, they probably feel they failed, and that they're rather exhausted by the fact that NGOs and so on for 20 years they've been campaigning and they've seen no real movement. But on the other hand, it's like throwing stones into a pond. Nothing seems to happen for ages and ages and ages. And then suddenly the issue breaks the surface of the water, and everything you throw in after that is visible because it's above the water. And I think people who've been working on this for the past 2 decades have actually been raising awareness in the public, even though they haven't actually managed to get them to change their habits. But there is an awareness out there. And the fact that the political process is broken down means that people are suddenly starting to think, well, we've got to do something with the politicians that clearly failed to grapple with this issue. So actually, I think timing-wise, this year is